What are sigils, and is it a doorway into magic?
When most people talk about sigil magic today, they talk about what we're going to talk about. It's basically the first thing we ever did. Like, it's 200,000 years old. If you look at the sort of scratchings on bones that are 100,000 years old that are found in southern Africa, that's a sigil. The power of sigil magic is that you are bringing a concept or an object or a person or a thing into a form that you can address and manipulate it with. Is very similar to any other kind of manifestation technology. This is like music. This is just a thing that humans know how to do. So trust yourself.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wondered how to work with magic and sigils, then do we have the Animistic show for you. Today I'll be talking with Gordon White, a modern magician, sigil expert, brilliant author of multiple books, including his latest, Animistic, and the brilliant podcaster and blogger of Rune Soup. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about the power of sigils, how to use them, and how to bring magic into your life. So welcome back to the show, Gordon. Are you ready to shine?
Very much so. Thank you very much for having me back. Looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and a mighty woohoo! So, before we dive right into things, are we all magicians?
Yes, in the sense that magic is a natural human capacity as far as I can tell, like speech, and more specifically like maybe singing or music. I think it's something that belongs to every human.
So then, do we all live in a magical universe?
By definition, absolutely. I think the whole thing is alive. One of my teachers who's been on your show, Alberto Violdo, says the universe isn't consciousness, it's magic. Like, the universe is magical. It's alive and wondrous and delightful and all those sort of good things.
Beautiful. So then if we go back in your history, when and how did you begin practicing magic and maybe stealing $50 from mom?
Maybe one day I'll go and see a hypnotist about this, but I do remember around the age of 13 or so, I had a series of strange dreams that, like, I literally can't remember. I just vaguely remember waking up going, that was weird. And I was sort of refereeing soccer at the time, which is really good money when you're 13, but it isn't enough to support a book habit if you're growing up in regional Australia, because these books are all imported and they're expensive and so on. So yeah, after some strange dreams experiences, I pooled my money with some money I pilfered from my mother's purse, which I thought I was getting away with this for months until, like, in adulthood, she's like, oh no, I knew what you were doing. But she also knew I wasn't spending it on drugs. So she's like, whatever, like literally at least he's buying books. Joke's on her, I was also buying cigarettes. But yeah, so I went off down to an independent bookstore we had in Newcastle, Australia, which is now gone because that's what happens to independent bookstores, I'm afraid, and bought a bunch of, with the benefit of some experience in hindsight, not great beginning books on magic, and a pack of cigarettes, aforementioned, and then I sat in this grandstand at a local football stadium and smoked some cigarettes and read these books, and it was sort of off to the races from then. I really discovered and kind of found my adolescent self in these stories of particularly British magicians and chaos magic and that kind of stuff. And that's where I began.
Very cool. I want to ask what chaos magic is, but before I do that, what are sigils, and is it a doorway into magic?
The sigils question can be answered at a 101 level all the way up to like a 3 or 401 level, right? Because when most people talk about sigil magic today, they talk about what we're going to talk about, which is a method of essentially turning intention statements into magical pictures that you then activate, right? But that's the 101. But it is because it is that, there's actually a history of sigils in Western magic going back to, I mean, in theory, cave paintings, right? But like, it's a cleaner historical story to say it began in Alexandria in the first few centuries AD, where you have things like magic squares and astrological sigils, where you can kind of use if you're doing a love spell, it'll be a collection of sacred numbers associated with Venus, and you kind of use those to draw a particular magical diagram, and that's a sigil for a particular love spell or whatever it happens to be, right? So there's like this long history of turning desire statements into pictures or some kind of like sacred object. But the chaos magic, which is the sort of, I guess, modern magic discipline that emerged in London in the 1980s, has as its core magical tech almost like a simplified version even of that, which uses English for people who speak English. Although I'm currently in Mexico, you can certainly use Spanish. It's the same idea. And you basically get a mission statement or a desire statement, and you turn it into something that's more easy to activate. So that's sigil magic. And consequently, to answer your question, if not first step into magic, then second step into magic. Like the first step into magic is probably what we were just discussing, really knowing in your bones that the universe is magical and that magic is your birthright, right? And that comes with some kind of daily practice, I would say, even just like a practice of gratitude or something. And I would say that's the first step into magic. But the second step into magic could well be something like sigil.
Thank you. So we're going to dive into all things sigil today and get people playing with sigils on the highest 101 level at least possible. But does magic increase the probability of things?
So this is how I typically frame it. And I use it like practical enchantment. Practical enchantment, I would say, is probability enhancement. So, and this is and it's more like, this is a framework for understanding why magic works more often than it should, but it doesn't work every time. So the example that I go to is, let's say you perform an enchantment to win the lottery. What you're doing is messing with the probability. So you might have a 1 in 100 million chance of winning, well, let's just say 1 in 20 million chance of winning the lottery. And you're really good at magic. And so you get that down to a 1 in 200,000 chance of winning the lottery. You're still at the 1 in 200,000 chance, right? So you can kind of get to the end. They've run the numbers and you're looking at your ticket and you didn't win. You can't say magic doesn't work because you actually don't know that, right? Like you might be really good at it. It's just that what you aren't good at is assessing probability. And so magic it's really useful when it's sort of, let's say love spell again, go back to that. You might have on any given night you're going out with your friends, you might have like a 1 in 15 chance of connecting with someone you actually like. You can bring that down to, again, like a 1 in 3, 1 in 2 by using different enchantments. It's almost like it's a heuristic, right? Like that may not be exactly how magic works because I think the universe is potentially a bit more analog, but it's easy to think of it that way because then you can kind of assess the lottery one is a good example. If you need money, you're better off enchanting, bringing down odds of say 1 in 5 to 1 in 2 rather than odds of 1 in 100 million down to like 1 in 200,000. And it's just a really good way of beginning to assess which sort of targets you would go after.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is toward the end, I want to talk about target selection. But I mean, if you look at Psi Research, for example, and we're talking about changing the odds or changing a random number generator from, 1 in 200,000 to 1 in 50,000 or something, is insane how much that makes of a difference. Let's go from there to, I was so shocked when I read this about you, and then I wasn't. You ended up accidentally in a moderately successful career in the global advertising industry, and that taught you about magic.
Absolutely. So I moved to New Zealand when I'm Australian, and I moved to New Zealand when I was 21 or 22, straight after college, where I did a film degree. So I was not expecting a high-flying career, put it that way. And I was going to New Zealand to work as a lift operator because they have better mountains than Australia does, and that kind of cool stuff you do in your early 20s. However, I got to Auckland, which is the capital city, largest city, no mountains. And I kept getting these really good jobs for a young guy, like working in call centers in like newspapers and magazines and so on, where you could just make some money and go out with your friends in the evening. And that showed up right as after the dot-com crash and the climb back up of digital media. So I kind of got in there, and because I had this film degree and I was in my early 20s, people assume, like we do of young people today, and it's kind of true, they know everything about digital technology and whatever. And that worked out really well. But I remember being in the newspapers and having like one of the major banks call up just as we were going to print. And they wanted to change the blue slightly on their home loan ads for the Saturday paper. And I'm sort of like, why? Like I can barely tell the difference. And they said, we can. And then they knew that different combinations of word and font size and color will actually influence I hate the word subliminal, but will influence people at an unconscious level to be more favorable. And we would know that based on their results, right? And that kind of got me interested in things like sigil magic or anything in the world of magic that involves like pictures, I guess, but like the use of color and sound and smell and all these components that go into ritual, because I could see them having real world effects. Just something as simple as going from one kind of background blue to another in a home loan app. Like that's quite a big change. And that was my sort of realization that, hang on, we are all, and it's sort of half where the name of the blog came from. We're all embedded in this soup of runes, like this soup of like symbols. And they're always working on us, and we're always working on them. And it's this sort of ongoing, almost like ecosystemic interaction. And for me, that's magic. And I kind of got to learn that firsthand by the successes and failures of different campaigns I was involved in.
So it sounds like what we get to do when we're playing with sigils, and we're going to learn how to do that in just a few minutes here, we get to be our own our own advertising agency manipulating ourselves.
An interdimensional advertising agency, quite literally to the stars. Yes.
Woohoo! All right. So let's go from there. And so we're going to talk about, well, in a sense, what we've been talking about is loading the dice, stacking things in our favor. When we talk about target selection, what's the importance of attacking steps individually? An author of yours who you love, I believe, very much, Peter J. Carroll, says, rather than going against formidable odds of saying, you know, this would be huge to say, I want $1 million tomorrow, but I might be able to make a sigil so that I can bring in an extra 1,000 at the end of the month.
Yeah, so let's just pick what people, and although this might be what people initially think they want in their life, with some examination, it probably isn't. But let's say you want to live on Sir Richard Branson's private island, and you currently work in a cubicle at Procter & Gamble. That is a long way to go, right? Now, you can in sigil to say, I live on my own private island. But I would say there are better ways, and there are better kind of new thought manifestation bringing in of the miraculous, that you don't have to do either or with these things. Like sigils is a very good component or part of a campaign. So I wouldn't use sigils to get myself from a cubicle at Procter & Gamble to a private island. I would pray for that, or you know, use whatever miraculous modality you like for it. But sigils, coming back to that probability idea, are better like, okay, well, what are the sort of 20 steps that I'm aware of between me, and it's honestly only 20, maybe not even that many, between a cubicle at Procter & Gamble and a private island. It's like, well, I need a promotion. And so start working on that. And I need to be in a department that's higher growth. Start working on that. These things are all lower, or yes, certainly lower probability targets that you can kind of do. And the way I have been doing sigil magic for about 20 years, the way I do it is it's a real scattergun approach, right? So you do a whole bunch of them at once for, you know, I want this promotion and I'm going to move to this department and a whole bunch of other things. And maybe 60%, 70% of them come off, but that's enough to move your life substantially so that then you do a reset. Because as I teach sigils at runesoup.com and a bunch of other stuff, right? And as I remind people, they're free. Sigils are free. No one's like looking at how many you've used and said, sorry, you've used your allocated quota of sigils for the month. And so you can use 20. 11 of them might come off, and then you reset. And then you do from this new position in your life where you're making more money and maybe you've moved house or you're in a different relationship. The route between you and that private island looks different from there. And so you reset again and you hit for those probabilities that are kind of closer and higher. And you keep doing it in this sort of scattergun approach, which is, this really suits like a chaos magic ethic or identity where the world is kind of like glorious and unpredictable, and you just got to mostly go along for the ride so that a whole bunch of stuff continues to happen that's surprising, which is good. And then you kind of like move into this next combination of things that you do and don't know and things that are surprising and aren't. And you do that for maybe 5 or 6 sigils campaign. And one, you start to like it. You start to like being in that wacky being like part of that dynamic living universe. And also you start to get a feel for the things that you can move with sigils and can't, because it's slightly different for each person. And it all comes down to that kind of like combination of, I don't know, maybe it's personality, maybe it's natal chart, maybe it's all this kind of stuff. But everyone kind of has like different skills and perspectives on the things they can move with it. And so each person, as they move through their sigil campaign, it's very different. And it can be a really exciting journey, I guess.
Very cool. So let's go from there. I want to get a definition, then we're going to dive into some how-to. How would you define a sigil? And on that note, how long? You mentioned going back to Alexandria, but you also mentioned cave dwellings. How long have sigils been about?
A sigil is a picture that a human makes to represent a thing. And it doesn't have to be a physical thing. It can be a concept, right? And so if you define it that way, it's basically the first thing we ever did. Like, it's 200,000 years old. Like, one of my first books is about this kind of stuff. Like, Starships is about sort of like how far back in history we can see the practice of magic. And if you look at the sort of scratchings on bones that are 100,000 years old that are found in southern Africa, I can, I guess, make the case in a court of law that's a sigil. We don't actually know what it is, but it is, if this idea that the power of sigil magic is that you are bringing a concept or an object or a person or a thing into a form that you can address and manipulate it with, right? So this is that really human power of being able to conceptualize. So that's what I mean by like sigils can be, you can say they're 200,000 years old, but as a recognizable practice of Western magic, it's fairer to say that we have the first evidence of things that we'd recognize, modern magicians would recognize as sigils, from the Greek magical papyri and the kind of Hellenistic era in the, let's just say, 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Now, so that's where we kind of get that combination of using letters and different astrological sacred numbers to sort of make pictures. The one that people use today, the kind of like the chaos magic inspired version of sigils, is even simpler still. Right. And so that my definition of a sigil is the pictogramming of a desired outcome. I just made that up now, but I actually quite like that. And that's what a sigil is. Like, you're basically turning your desired outcome into a picture, quite literally. And how you do that in a contemporary sense is you sort of write out a statement. And this is where shows like yours are really, really good, right? Because the rules, they're not rules. The best practice for generating sigil statements is very similar to any other kind of manifestation technology. And so you don't sort of focus on intention statements that are negative. So if you are on a health journey involved with cancer, you don't use the word cancer in your intention statement. You use words like full health or, happy, healthy life. So those kind of rules are the same for, again, not rules, guidelines for sigil magic, because you're doing the same thing, right? You're communicating with your unconscious, however you want to define it. And so you pick statements and you do them either in the present tense or in some way describing it as already achieved. So you don't say, I would like to live on a private island one day. You would say, I live on a private island, or I own a private island, or a private island is my home. You move the statement, because again, your unconscious is profoundly powerful, but also a toddler, right? So it struggles with, and this is really important, it struggles with the nuance that we as humans, conscious humans, have built into our language. And I think that's because that nuance kind of doesn't exist, right? Like, I think the stuff that exists is way more emotional and analog, like I said before. So those are the kind of rules. You get a statement that's, if it's a health journey, you talk about full health. Ideally something like in the present tense, like I live on a private island, or a private island is my home. And then in this modality, you take out all the vowels and repeating letters. So then you end up having a string of consonants.
So I'm going to pause you for 1 second. I'm going to call it step by step. But with that said, I just got to bring something up that's blowing my mind right now. which is I had some documentary filmmakers out here yesterday, and they needed to get in touch with somebody who I know how to get in touch with, who is on a private island that is by Richard Branson. And so this morning I was going, which island is Richard Branson's and which is my friend on? And then in this interview, I mean, I'm not thinking about Richard Branson's island every single day, Gordon. So I'm going, what?
Yeah. Me neither. That's cool. I like that. Yeah. His island's Necker, isn't it?
I have to Google it later today.
I know that because I met him once and he bought me a bottle of champagne. So, I think it's Necker Island.
So we're going to say step 1 is write out your desire or goal. Write it out as if it's present tense. Write it out as a positive as well. And then step 2 is doing what?
Step 2 is eliminating the vowels and eliminating the double ups of consonants, right? So let's go. I live on a private island. No, I live on a private island. So the I, gone. L, you keep. I, gone. V, you keep. E, gone. A, gone. P, you keep. R, you keep. I, gone. V, get rid of that because you've already got a V in live. And you move further along that whole statement, and then you bring it down to, there'll be about, let's just say 8 consonant letters in a string on the next line. And now comes the creative part that everyone freaks out at. And I appreciate that because my artistic skills are, let's just say, minimal at best. It's better and more accurate to say non-existent. And so the next step, once you've got that string, so that's step 2. Step 3 is with that string of consonants, non-repeating consonants, you turn that into a picture. And that's what I mean by that seems like a big leap for people. And it is. And what you do is basically smush them together. So if you think about a W, an M, and a Y, and a V, they're all these kind of like, it's sort of like a string of diagonal lines. So you can kind of go, all right, well, I'm just going to do that as like almost like a child doing mountains. And then you think you've got like a T. I might switch that up and slide one of these down here and then up. And so the step after your string of consonants, the next step down is like your first draft or first pass of a picture. Is hideous. It's just like, just smush those consonants together and you'll have something you go, this is crap. Okay. And it is. The next step, because you want your unconscious to like it, the next step is to turn that into something that's appealing to you. And this is where the kind of like creative sentiment comes in. And that's the step where it can look very different because those up and down jaggedy lines might look like a mountain and this might look like a stick figure in a boat. And you kind of see it and go, okay, well, I'm actually going to make that like a stick figure in a canoe with some mountains behind it. Again, all quite idealized. But you just end up finally with this simple kind of pleasing pictogram from a statement at the beginning. And then you've completed your sigil. So that's it. And I like to, this is almost, that's how you complete a sigil. The process of activating them. I do more than one at once. So I would repeat that for any of the statements. You repeat that process. So you have a sigil that you create for each statement that you're going to activate in a particular sigil magic session.
So I want to repeat the statement, repeat the order for people, and then I want to get into, you just dropped a bombshell. I do more than the one at once. So write out your desired goal. Step 2, cross out the vowels and repeated letters. Step 3, mash the letters together into a single, using your terminology, hideous image or glyph. And then start amending this glyph until it starts to look more pleasing to the eye as best as you can do.
Yes, and there is no right or wrong way. That's what people, we're all so traumatized as kids from art school and art lessons in high school and so on. We think I'm doing this wrong. This looks ugly. People are it's not as good as someone else's. Not necessarily get over that, move through it. And you only move through it by doing it. It's important to understand that there is not only no right or wrong way to do this, but I actually think at least half, maybe exactly half of the activation power of each sigil comes from that process. It actually comes from that process of you with your own mind going from that statement to a picture. So it actually doesn't matter what it looks like. Again, you just have to do it and trust me on it, and you'll think it looks terrible. your first few times. Don't worry, it'll still work. And it's honestly the process that is important. So you kind of like go through it. And the more you do, the easier it becomes. But like, that's really important for people to understand. It's like, oh, this looks ugly, this isn't going to work. It's like, don't trust me, that's just the ghosts from your past talking. Don't worry about that. It is honestly the process of going from statement to picture, that whatever it looks like, that's important.
It's interesting because it seems like it's energy squared, it's energy amplified. There's the energy. Every word has an energy, has a meaning behind it. Along with the symbols themselves were embedded with energy and a meaning before even that word was assembled. So you've got lots of energy there, which you're putting down, and even if you're pulling out consonants or vowels or whatever you're pulling out, it's still embedded with that energy. But then you're doing it, and you're putting your energy and your meaning into it as well.
And that's literally how and why I think it works, and why I think it's more powerful magic than people realize. Like, so the word grimoire comes from grammar. It's the same root word, like, and spell, like a magic spell, comes from this deep human awareness that there is something scarily transformational about language. And so something happens, just as you say, like each word has like an energy and a power to it, which is already there in those statements, those powerful intention statements you start with. And then you become a magician when you start like rearranging and moving them around. And that tells your unconscious something, I'm sure of it. That tells your unconscious like, ooh, we're doing magic now. And I think that's why just release any worry about artistic skills, because if you're doing that, you're doing magic.
It's interesting. So years ago, I sat for, I don't know how long it was, couple years, maybe not that long, maybe a couple years, with a monk who had a very high level monk from Tibet. We'll call him that. And we did a lot of Tibetan chanting. And I have no idea what the words meant, but there was a frequency behind them, and each statement was embedded with an energy. I didn't even need to know what I was saying. And language, as you're saying, is embedded with this energy. So now we're playing with something. It's why we really do get to watch our words. We are playing something that's just energy laden.
Absolutely. And I didn't start off, and in fact, if you read, say, the early chaos magic books, I didn't start off kind of combining that new thought manifestation idea of only using present tense and only using positive terms. When I started doing sigils as a kid, I just did, I want this thing, right? And if I say I want $500, what you're actually doing is embedding a want. You're embedding a lack, right? And you do sigil magic for long enough and you realize the power of words. And that's why you take them really seriously, even when you're not doing sigil magic. It's like, okay, I'm going to watch my thoughts and I'm going to watch my words, because there's a responsibility that comes from being human and having a capacity with language. And that's we're making reality with this stuff,
Thank you. So let's go from there and let's complicate things. Let's complicate things to simplify things by saying, let's do multiple ones at the same time. And I'm going to throw a couple fun terms in here, which would be rubber fish and shoaling.
Yeah. Robofish.
Say that for me again.
It's robofish.
Thank you. Yes, robofish.
Okay, so I'll tell you the story behind where these are terms that I came up with over a decade ago now. You'll find if you Google rune soup sigils, you'll get this article I wrote a decade ago, which is still good, which will go through this entire process, right? Basically, I'd been in London a year or so, and I'd been made redundant from Discovery Channel, and I was trying to get jobs. And this is like 2009, so after the Lehman Brothers event and the financial crisis. So it was extremely difficult to get jobs at the best of time. And I showed up just in time for that financial crisis, which wasn't great. It was like the worst timing pretty much since the Great Fire to try and get a job in London. Anyway, so I was trying to get a job because I was running out of money. And I kept throwing a whole bunch of different sigils in at the one time as I was doing all this different activation. So it would be job stuff, but it would be like affordable interview clothes and all this kind of, this is where it started to come from. Like, if I'm going to be doing a full kind of activation ceremony, I'm going to do more than one at once. And I also had the time, right? Because I didn't have a job. And so that's where the idea of bringing or activating more than one of them at once came from. And what I noticed was that I couldn't get sigils to work quickly. It was like there was a 2-week delay, give or take, on all of them. So I said, okay, what can I do to kind of like pull them forward in time? What can I do to bring them forward in time? And I started, and I was reading some science articles at the time about this university in the north of England that was working on how fish move. And one of the things they did was they built a robo-fish, like a robot stickleback fish, and they put it in with a whole bunch of live sticklebacks. And this fish would make bold movements. And so the normal fish, the normal fish didn't follow the robot if it was just doing normal movements, but it made bold movements like sharp turns or fast in one direction. It would all follow them. And it would follow them because the guess was, it seems like that fish, that robot fish, had worked out there was a predator nearby, and they were just kind of like going with the flow in that sense. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do a sigil for something that I can guarantee. Like, I eat spaghetti tonight, like spaghetti for supper or something, and I'll throw that in with the pile of sigils for like getting a job and like affordable clothes and all this kind of stuff. I thought if I and the whole point with that, and I called that sigil the robo-fish, because in my head I was thinking, like, I'll get a sigil for something that will happen really soon, and that will kind of tell the other sigils that are in that shoal, in that group, to manifest. And so I was actually trying to like speed up time with these things, and they sort of did. But more importantly, it appears to improve their manifestation capacity, because it's a thing. It's almost like it tells the unconscious to bring it into the real world rather than to speed up time. It's sort of the same thing depending on what you ask for, right? But if you send 5 statements down, including I eat spaghetti for supper, and then you make yourself some spaghetti, it's like your unconscious is like, okay, well, this happened. I'm just going to bring the other things up with it. So it's this technique of improving the sort of likelihood of manifestation of your sigil. So that's the kind of the rune soup approach, is shoaling, which is more than one at once, and including in a shoal a robo-fish sigil, like something. And honestly, people think it's got to be, well, can it be this, can it be that? It literally can be, I drink a glass of water. It's long as it's something that you can guarantee will happen, then that's what counts. And you throw it in there with your promotion sigils and all the rest of it, and it appears to just kind of like signal to the unconscious that that's where these things are supposed to manifest. They're supposed to be like here in the physical. That's my guess, but it certainly works.
Well, it also takes the thinking mind and the subconscious out of the Debbie Downer of approach of, well, this stuff doesn't work, because now the subconscious going, well, actually this one did.
In Aboriginal Australia, or at least parts of Aboriginal Australia, when you wake up in the morning, you will do something to sort of to ritualize a dream experience you've just had. Like, so you wake up in the morning, your dreams are still fresh. You might do something like compose a little whistle or draw something in the dirt. And that's really to signal to the rest of the universe that you are a kind of being that moves between those worlds, right? So another way of saying that is, the Jungian way of saying that would be to turn a friendly face to the unconscious. And that's what a robo-fish does. You turn a friendly face to the unconscious. You actually improve the not just the one-way direction, but both-way direction of communication with your unconscious. And I think that's why it is why it has such an uplift to bringing into being the things that you sigil for.
Thank you. Now, why are we, maybe you can define what shoaling is. Why are we doing multiple sigils at the same time? Is there a resonance? Is there a frequency? Is it because, well, you're going to get more bang for your buck? What's the reason behind it?
It's basically the bang for your buck. Like, you honestly don't have to. You could do 2 at once, right? So you could do the thing that you want and a robo-fish. And technically that's a shoal because it's 2 sigils, right? So I got the word shoal as like from the movement of fish, like schooling. So I kind of stuck with a fish-based metaphor for the whole framework. So there's nothing kind of like tricksy about the word. It's just activating more than one sigil at once, right? And genuinely, it's because I got really used to that kind of chaotic approach I was speaking about earlier, where you'll do 8 and 4 of them will come off. But those 4 will be things like a new job and all this stuff, so that all of a sudden your life's very different. And then when you kind of like reset and go again and create a whole bunch of statements to move towards that longer term goal, like living on Richard Branson's island, your life looks different from that point. And you do another 8 and you just kind of learn. And it's like this scattergun approach of moving into a desired future. And if people don't resonate with that, they don't need to. You literally can do 1 sigil and a robofish and you'll be fine. But I just figure if you're taking the time to kind of sit down and create these, lovely little squiggles, then you might as well do more than 1. Because again, this comes back to they're free. There's always something you want. It can be, and I don't want to say silly, frivolous in a nice sense. Like I would like more celebrity sightings, or I would always like to get a seat on the bus. Like there are things that you think, well, why not ask for it? Again, free. Why not bring that into manifestation?
Well, you'd love to go to Chichen Itza and all of a sudden run into a Mayan shaman who says, "Gordon, I've been waiting for you."
Something like that. Just honestly, I mean, always getting a parking space. There's just stuff that when you think about it, and it's good training for your life, because, and this is one of the things I teach when we go through the Sigils course, people aren't good at wanting. And it's not that we don't want stuff. It's that we haven't sat with desire in a healthy way. So there are things we confuse want with need, like, oh, I want a bigger house. I'm like, why? So, well, because I got 3 kids and it's 2 bedrooms. So, well, that's more a need. And so desire and want and all of that kind of stuff inside capitalism is actually really fraught, And so something like a sigil process in a gentle way forces you to do the work of kind of like understanding and validating and freeing your desires.
Side thought that actually is right on track. Tell me about conscious, unconscious mind, Marlboro Man, and sigils.
I'm not sure if I remember what I was talking about with the Marlboro Man.
How these things, looking at, I think it's called a third person or third party perspective.
Oh, yeah. So the classic, this is again more advertising learnings, right? So the classic approach to sigils that was sort of pioneered in the 1980s by like the founders of chaos magic, like Peter J. Carroll, was that you would create a sigil and you'd activate it and then you'd destroy it. And you can. And that was based on a kind of early 20th century idea of how the conscious and unconscious minds were sort of fully separate. And that's just not true. Like that, we've known that for about 70 years. Like there's some really interesting, there was some mid-20th century research on people with like complete amnesia who they would send through mazes like on a daily basis. So you do the maze on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And by the middle of the week, even though they had no memory of the day before, they'd move through the maze faster. So some part of them is remembering like the maze, right? So what that means is, even though it's not in the conscious mind, the unconscious is interacting with the conscious at the same time. These are just terms we've invented. So that kind of like very beginning version of sigil magic is based on like an older framework of the human mind, which we've moved on from. And again, so from an advertising perspective, there's something called low attention processing, which is basically how advertising, quote unquote, works. And so if you see something for seven times, 7 different imprints. So it's a Coca-Cola ad. You might see a billboard. You might see a web banner. You might see it on the side of a truck. You might see it on the subway. Basically, but somewhere between 5 and 7 imprints, you start to become favorable to the brand. Like it's like a brand uplift happens, even if you're not aware of it. And this is the third person perception. Like everyone thinks that advertising works on everyone but themselves. But trust me, it works on you because it's this kind of like unconscious repeating process.
I wanted a Porsche growing up. Do you know why I wanted a Porsche?
Go for it.
Tom Cruise Risky Business, and I didn't even realize that until I was an adult. It was burned in by watching what I thought was a cool movie having nothing to do with a Porsche.
Yeah. So based on the human mind's capacity to do things like that, I started experimenting with low attention processing with sigils. And that's basically sticking them somewhere where you half see them and half forget them. So I would stick them, I had a mirror in my above the fireplace in the sort of bedroom in London. And I would just sort of glue tack them to the mirror. And eventually the mirror would be full, and then I would throw them out. But the good thing is you'd sort of half see them over the course of your day, which means they're kind of working again. And the best thing is when the mirror was full, and I would take them off and throw them out or burn them or throw them in the Thames or whatever. We'll get to disposal of sigils eventually. I couldn't remember what each of them were. And I would feel some of them and go, I think this one worked and I think this one did. But like that felt right for me. That felt right to just keep them somewhere. And then once the wall because I also, when I moved back to Australia, I put them on the side of the fridge in our first apartment. So they weren't front on the fridge, but as you'd walk into and out of the kitchen, you'd half see them. And again, once the fridge filled up, just take them all off. And we actually lived in a 19th century graveyard, so it was easy to dispose of them. But that's...
You lived in hold on, backing up. You lived in a graveyard.
We did. Yeah. It was outside of Sydney, there's a town called Windsor, which is an old-timey colonial town, right? And yeah, we had apartments built behind this church. And so we were in the graveyard, and I think they just moved the headstones rather than the bodies. And it was, anyway, but that meant that was quite good from a magic perspective. But that was another update in I think what works for me with sigils is to have them somewhere. And again, this is one of those things that people second guess. Well, how long should I keep them on the mirror? How long should I keep them on the fridge? Like, I literally don't know. It will be different for you because it's your mind. You know, you'll look at them and go, I think these are done, and pull them off. But it's sort of ideal if you can't remember what they're for. And I would put more than one shoal up, right? So I might do like 5 in one shoal, which means, and so there'd be about 5 shoals before the mirror filled up. So I'd be disposing of 25 at once, and some of them would probably be repeats and double ups and so on. That's just part of the literal chaos of the process, and you just kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, I think these are done, and I pull them off and I take them and you either burn them or kind of get rid of them in some sort of ceremonialized way, and that worked. That was like the final piece combined with the robofish and the shoaling that worked for me for like really getting this sigil process to hum.
Now, you mentioned, and I want to go back to disposal and whether we really want to burn or get rid of these things or not. But before we get there, let's talk. You used the word ceremony. What kind of ceremony? Is there incense? Is there music? Is there, I'm calling in my angels and guides? What are we doing to get in this? I think of everything as sacred. We've got a baby coming in a few weeks. I think of that as the most sacred ceremony possible. And I've actually got to do some sigil work because she's supposed to need a cardiac procedure when she's born. So I'm going to be all over the sigil starting today, Gordon. But how do we make this sacred?
That will depend on your own spiritual framework and appetite and interest for it. So my background is in ritual magic, right? So I like it. I like the Catholicism sense, the bells and smells, right? I like that. It is absolutely not necessary if you're either uninterested or like a bit squeamish about it, both entirely valid, right? What I would say is a bare minimum, you mentioned calling in your angels. Like say, I call upon my highest powers and angels to bear witness to this rite of manifestation. So you could do something as simple as that. And when I say that's simple, that's really powerful. That's like 80% of the ceremony anyway, right? So coming back to Alberto Bioldo, what his Andy and shamanic teachers would say is open sacred space and get out of the way. And that's a really good way of understanding ceremony, right? Like you call in the highest powers and get out of their way. And that's not just for sigils, that's for whatever this stuff is. So it can be as simple as that. And then the activation process, I actually have some cards near me. Right. So, because I'm learning Spanish, because I am not a Spanish speaker and I'm in the Americas for a few months. But like these are just, let's say I've drawn sigils on these cards. And so I lay them out in front of me, got my 4 or 5 cards. And basically, you just kind of take a few breaths and bring yourself into that meditative state and just sort of look at them. And then what I do is I pick up each one individually and just kind of unfocus my eyes and look at them. And it's sort of like this is real 90s energy, but they're magic eye puzzles.
The space shuttle that appears, I talked about this in a class just within the last week or two, the space shuttle that appears out of just these dots and a poster on the wall.
That kind of stuff, right? So, because if you could remember, if you're old enough to remember the magic eye fad of the 90s. And you kind of like, I'm not seeing anything, I'm not seeing anything. It's like, and it's not quite unfocusing your eyes, it's relaxing your eyes.
You can't try or it's not going to
come
happen.
Exactly. And I kind of do the same thing. So I just sort of look at them, and what happens is that they start to warp because you're unfocusing or relaxing your eyes. And this is how it looks like a magic eye puzzle for me. And then because you're sort of overlapping the bits you've drawn on and the bits you haven't, it's like they vanish. It's like it sort of vanishes and then it's done. And I just have this sensation in my mind or in my body when I'm looking at them. They go from active to inert. So I'm looking at them, and they seem alive, and then they'll sort of warp a bit because I'm looking at them funny. And then they'll go back and they'll feel inert, and all of a sudden they'll just feel like a little squiggle on a piece of card. And that's when you put them down and you move to the next one, because it feels to me like it's sort of, you're looking at them and they're going into your mind, and then once they're in your mind, they're no longer in the card, and you put them down. And I just kind of move through that process. Now, there's a step, so almost like there's a gap in between these two, which I found helps, because I think it helps to not remember which sigil goes with which statement. This is the other powerful thing about shoaling, right? So how I would do it is I would write them out in a notebook the day before, write out my statement, get my letters, turn that into a squiggle, do that again 4 or 5 times. And so I would have a book of that. And I would take those squiggles and I would write them on I would use black card, like art paper, and a gold paint pen. Why? Because I like it. There's no magical skill with it. I just think it looks good.
Does it have glitter with the gold?
No, but I wouldn't rule it out because I'm very gay and that sounds really fun. But like, I would create the sigils the day before, which means you'd come, and then the book is long gone. The book is in another room. And so you have your 4 or 5 little bits of black card the next day, and you kind of mix them up and you put them down. And obviously, and this is, when you are job hunting, you are acutely aware that you don't have a job. So the idea that you can kind of like forget your desire statement isn't quite right. And that was a big part of the early sigils technology, was that you had to forget what the statement was once you'd activated it. That's why you would burn it. Because otherwise, this is the kind of theory of mind, right? Otherwise, it would stay in the conscious mind and not sink into the unconscious. And that's just not how the mind works. So don't worry about that necessarily. But by the same token, it does help to sort of take the sharp edges off your fears and concerns. So if you are manifesting something that is important, like I don't have a job and I need a job, it's just easy to kind of put it in so you don't quite remember which sigil is for the spaghetti and which sigil is for the job, you know? And so that's one of the other powerful things about the 5 or so shoaling statements. And that's literally how it would work. You'd open sacred space, however you want to do it, and then I would honestly just look at them. I am still an experienced meditator, but that kind of idea of just kind of quieting the mind and slowing down the cycles a bit and looking at them in this almost like emotionless but confident way until they kind of like warp and feel magical, and then they will just churn into little squiggles on a card, and then you put them down. And then you close ceremony, however you do that. And then if you feel like it, you can blue tack them to your mirror or wherever you choose to keep them. And that's truly the whole process.
Now, looking back, in the early days, it was getting rid of them. Now, what do you do with them after you're done?
Yeah, no, I keep them around, and then I get rid of them in a big job lot, right? So I keep them around because there's that low attention processing of it. And again, this is just because it works for me, and it has worked for a lot of other people, to just have them half seen and not being conscious of. And this comes back to that, you won't forget your desires, but you will just gently remind your unconscious of them in a way that doesn't have any anxiety attached to them. And that's why I think keeping them around actually works. If you feel called to get rid of them, and because that was the original sigil tech, then absolutely do it. And this comes down to that body feel, and it will be different for everyone. It's like, no, I feel like once they're activated and they've just turned into paper, I want them gone. I want that gone. If that's how it is for you, trust that. Like I'm just some voice on the internet. What's more important is your your body feel and how it is for you and for your life. Again, there's no right or wrong outside of what truly feels right for you on that intuitive level.
Thank you. So what have you learned? And then I want to, for a last little bit, I want to play with I want to play with the reality of stargates and sigils. But before we do that, are there things that you have learned since you really started teaching about this a long time ago of sigils, or how has it morphed for you in this time?
I have learned, it's kind of like what we discussed before, which is that language and thoughts are powerful and are manifesting even when you're not doing it intentionally or consciously. And so you kind of learn to have more integrity with your own thoughts and to switch up, because everyone, gets in moods, right? But just to kind of go, okay, hang on, to get yourself consciously out of those funks or moods or dark or malicious or negative thinking as quickly as possible, because it's not good for the universe or for you. And you learn that in your bones when you do sigil magic, because you're literally right? It is sigil magic works the same way any thought or attitude or emotion works. It's just a little bit, there's just more precision in its delivery, but it's that same kind of notion, right? And so that's the big learning. And the other one, coming back to ceremony and ritual magic and the rest of it, is I like it. I like ritual. I like ceremony. It is, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true. It's the least important part of the process. As long as you've opened sacred space, you will not get your sigils to manifest better by spending more on incense. Like, you just won't. You will get your sigils to manifest better by spending more time with your own thoughts and desires, and doing that inner work. And I can't believe I'm saying that, because I love ceremony, but it's true. That's like the least.
The theatrics are the least important.
Yeah, and I love them, and so I still do them, but don't let that intimidate you out of this kind of really powerful modality if you feel drawn to it, because like truly it will move the needle the least.
Very good. So on that note, we had talked before about potentially doing a show on stargates. I ended up being drawn and pulled to sigils, but you said, Michael, there's a connection. We can weave this together. Where do we go from here? So
the stargate thing, it's interesting. So I've got the book here. I'm going to show. I got the paperback because I'm not traveling with the hardcover.
And I've got the hardcover, and it is absolutely amazing here.
Yeah, and there's a couple of chapters in that I think are sort of relevant. But one of them is called Sky Country, and it's about my time out in the center of Australia in the desert. Like the night sky under the desert is something I hope everyone experiences once in their life, because it's like you're in space. You can understand why and how the stars are at the base of that kind of like human notion of spirituality, right? And so a stargate, when we have this term and we expect it to be this high technology thing because of that, frankly, really good movie. If people haven't seen it for a while, Stargate the movie is better than you remember, right?
But it's also more violent. I'm going, why are they packing guns, man?
Yeah. Good point. So it's kind of like how you define what a Stargate is. And it is a place where the beings and the world that we understand as the stars it can be in relation to us. And when I was out on Unanu lands in central Australia at a place called Cave Hill, which is basically the highest concentration of sort of cave art in central Australia, and it's part of the Seven Sisters songline. And in particular, it's the place where the Seven Sisters themselves are chased into the night sky by this sort of like trickster devil being called Wadiniru. I'm standing on this rock at the edge of where the Seven Sisters escape out of the back of the cave, and there's this sort of rock platform, and then it's the sky. And the experience of being there, this comes back to the idea that stargates aren't high technology. It was happening around me. I've been a lot of powerful places, in fact, quite recently, but I've been a lot of sacred and impressive places. And this was somehow happening continuously around me. The Seven Sisters are, of course, the Pleiades, right? these seven sisters were sort of like continuously launching into the sky and were these, and I was in and with the Pleiades there on this kind of like stone platform in the middle of the desert. This is incredible. And that's Stargate. Now, how I bring that back to Sigils comes back to the story of the fact that we get that idea of kind of turning a desire into a picture in the way we do it in the West. We get that from Hellenistic Egypt. So follow me on this little journey, right? So at Cave Hill, you have evidence that at the 35,000 year ago mark, we have an awareness of a sky-ground relationship, a sky-ground dualism, that there are things we can arrange on planet Earth, paintings and landforms and so on, that are powerfully in resonance with the stars. And so when we get to Egypt, so 20,000 years later, when we get to Egypt, we see that sky-ground dualism reach its most magnificent architectural apogee, because it's not just the pyramids. Every temple is astrologically aligned in Egypt. Every temple, not just one, all of them, right? So this idea of the map of the sky and the ground in Egypt, once we hit the Hellenistic era and we get the rise of Hermeticism, Hermeticism is like the miniaturization of that Egyptian temple technology of making a map of the sky on the ground with buildings. They made it smaller first with statues, and then they made it smaller again with gemstones and the rest of it. And that's that kind of hermetic technology of bringing the stars and bringing that resonance down to a form that can be addressed on the human level. And that's where we get sigils from.
I want to pause you. I want you to repeat that. But Hermeticism, by definition, as above, so below. And you're saying that quite literally.
Yeah. So Hermeticism is, and there's actually a friend of mine, Dr. Aaron Cheek, who's an historian about this kind of stuff. This is where I get it from. It's like the Hermetic axioms and the Hermetic magic of creating gemstones and all that kind of like miniaturization of the dynastic Egypt, like priestly technology, if you will, of doing at a much grander scale a map of the sky on the ground. Because of course, once you get to like the late the late era of Egypt and then the Hellenistic era, like Egypt's in a state of political collapse, right? And that's written about in the Hermetic texts. And so the miniaturization of the technology is also the portability of it, because then it shows up a few centuries later in the astrological magic of Islamic Egypt and Spain and so on, and from there into the grimoires and to us. So the technology, kind of like Judaism itself, frankly, is at first a miniaturization and then a portability because of political necessity of this sky ground dualism. And Egypt is not where it was invented. Egypt inherited and kind of demonstrated the full flourishing capacity of that sky ground language, which then moved into Hermeticism and magic and thus sigils. So when I like the flow of history, right? So that when you're there doing your funny little squiggle on a black piece of card to get a job, you are in resonance and in the same lineage as Hermetic Egypt, dynastic Egypt, and back 100,000 years to that kind of like carved bone in southern Africa. And that's a beautiful story. That's what I mean. This stuff belongs to everyone.
I can't believe I'm going to go here, Gordon. Did it start on Earth?
That's definitional. So I don't think so, but it doesn't mean that little green men brought it down in flying saucers, right? So if you look, say the Ananu in Central Egypt, but also like Central Australia, but also the Burong and other Aboriginal nations believe that the stars are the campfires of the ancestors. So that when you are out there, and this is what it feels like, when you're out there in the desert at night and you're by a fire and you're looking up at the stars, like you can touch them, you almost want to duck. They're that close, right? It's just incredible. There is something about that that is scientifically correct, but although I would reverse that, right? Because life on Earth came from space by definition. It didn't happen here. I'm very much a panspermia theorist, right? Like, not even in a computer can we demonstrate how amino acids can get struck by lightning and turn into life. It's the dumbest idea possible. Like, life comes from life, which means it arrived from space, you know. And so in that sense, yes, it does. But also we can do something that I think people misinterpret in a materialism basis. We can be in resonance with the stars, the star beings, the Shaska-Runa, the star nations, like we always have been. And they are guides and teachers. And so in that sense, it didn't come from Earth, because we learnt that capacity from them. Or else why would we go to such trouble to be in that sky-ground resonance? So no, it didn't. It's not an Earth technology, put it that way.
Thank you. And I may well have to have you back in the future to talk about sky people and sky teachers. I think that's important for us to understand where we came from, to understand where we are in the cosmos, and understand where in the world we get to go from here. With that said, where can people go, Gordon, to find out more, to find your work, to find Animistic, to find everything that you have to offer?
So best place is runesoup.com. And if you want to do sigil magic, as we've kind of discussed in this show, the easiest thing to do is Google RuneSoup sigils or sigils reboot. And that article will come up, first of your search results listing, and find it there, because it's 10 years old. So it won't be at the top of the blog, but the show and everything else that's going on, you find at runesoup.com. You can get Animistic ideally from scarletimprint.com, the publisher website. Otherwise, of course, the usual, the CIA bookstore, the rest of it. You'll find you'll find it where good books are sold. I want to be clear, because we had a really cool chat about sigils and I've had a really good time. There are no sigils in this. So if you're like, I'm going to do sigils, this is a great book. I love it. There are no sigils in it. Yeah, just like I don't want people buying it going, where are the sigils? They're not in there. It's a book about animism. You'll find the sigils. The good news is free. You'll find the sigils at runesoup.com.
Any last words of wisdom on playing with sigils, on chaos magic, on sending people out into this magical world that you'd like to share with people?
Even if you don't think so, you know how to do this. This is like music. This is like singing. This is just a thing that humans know how to do. So trust yourself.
Woohoo! All right, hold on one moment and I'll go get Rue. Thanks so much, Gordon. I don't think you've met Gordon before, have you?
No, I have chickens. That is not a small bird.
No, this is not a small bird.
A small bird. That's a velociraptor.
He is. It's well put.
Yeah. Magnificent, though. What kind is it?
He is a cuckoo moran. So a
really cool.
French bird. And he is the only rooster or chicken that I've ever had. And I am told he is huge.
I have about 80 birds, and that looks about the same size as all 80 of my birds. So, yeah.
What kind are yours?
I got leghorns, some bantams, some marins. Can't remember. We've sort of blended some of them all up. There's another one that I'm thinking Rhode Island Reds. So quite a few.
Wow. Very cool.
There we go.
Absolutely. All right. Would you mind leading us in a meditation then? And I'm going to mute so that Rue doesn't sing through it.
Okay, so for this exercise, what we're going to be doing is bringing together the three shamanic worlds, bringing together the upper world and the lower world here with us in the middle world. And we're going to do it by bringing the energy of all of these worlds, or both of these worlds, in through the three Andean energy centers. One in the forehead, where your third eye chakra would be, one in the heart, and then one in the belly. And these are right thought, which is obviously in the head, right heart, which is in the heart, and right action, which is in the belly. And these are the sort of three ways that energy manifests. So what we're going to do, I just want you to have your feet on the ground and your back straight, and just take a couple of breaths just to drop into the exercise. And on the in-breath, what I want you to do is just pull down a brilliant column of powerful white energy from the upper world on the in-breath down through the top of your head and into that heart center. And then on the next in-breath, I just want you to do the same thing, but pull that energy up, that cool, healing energy from deep in the center of the earth, from the lower world. Again on the in-breath, up to that heart center. And we're going to do that again. And this time, bring that energy down on the in-breath. And then on the out-breath, just have that radiate from your heart center out into the room in which you're in. And then again, the same thing, pulling that energy out from the lower world on the in-breath to your heart center and breathing that out. Okay, breath in from the upper world and out into the room. Breath in from the lower world and out into the room. Now we're going to do the same thing into the belly center, the right action center. So on the in-breath, pulling that energy from the upper world into that belly center, and on the out-breath, out into the room. And on the in-breath, pull that healing energy from the lower world into that belly center and out into the room. And now right thought. So going into the forehead to that brow chakra on the in-breath from the upper world. And then breathing it out into the center of the room. And now breathing it up from the lower world to that same brow chakra area. And then out into the room. And so we're just going to cycle through this, and I'm just going to say heart and up and down. So breathing into the heart and out from the heart. And then up into the heart and out from the heart. And breathing down into the belly, and out from the belly, and up into the belly, and out into the room, and then down into that brow chakra area, and out into the room, and then up into that brow chakra area, and out into the room. And I'm just going to leave you to cycle with that for a few more breaths. Going back to the heart, and then the belly, and then the brow. And as you're bringing this energy from the upper world into the middle world, and from the lower world into the middle world, just ask at this moment your highest powers, what wants to come through you into the world right now? Just note any impressions or thoughts or crazy long to-do lists that arrive in your mind. And just a couple more breaths of just stitching those three sacred worlds together all around you in your space. And then pause, a moment of gratitude. And then you're done.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Gordon. This has been beautiful and really real. it was.
That's like, he sounds like a kookaburra. I think he's noticed I'm Australian. There you go.
Could be.
That's his good kookaburra impression.
So he has his own language, and that was meaning love. So that is a very affectionate sound that he was making there, and I would second that. This has been beautiful. I didn't know where my heart was going to pull me, And it was pulled to take us in a direction that to me is a huge door opener. And I think that's what we did for people today. And so I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And so for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, check out all things Gordon White and Ruin Soup, and of course, check out his beautiful new book, which has nothing to do with sigils, Animistic, and then begin playing with sigil magic today and shine bright. Woohoo! What a beautiful intro to magic, a beautiful intro to chaos magic, a beautiful intro to sigil magic. Highly recommend you play with sigils, see where you get. On that note, do connect with your angels and guides through automatic writing. Go to automaticwriting.com, learn automatic writing, join me for one of our live classes, and then, of course, before, during, after, become the mystic you were always meant to be. Go to inspirenationuniversity.com and become a modern mystic. Classes 4 Wednesdays a month. Of course, click the subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows, YouTube premieres, live events with me. Remember, we're also a podcast on Spotify, on iTunes, on wherever you subscribe to your favorite podcast. Here's a link to the next amazing video. Leave your comments below. Big thumbs up. Love you guys so much. Keep on shining bright. Woohoo! How does it get any better than this, Rue? How does it get any better than this? Love you guys. Good job, Rue. Oh, I know. Let's get you some food.